The great chamber of the Galactic Council hummed with tension as representatives from 47 species gathered in emergency session on the station orbiting Nexus Prime High. Arbiter Zelneth of the Vrin. Dominion called the assembly to order with 3 sharp strikes of his ceremonial staff against the crystalline floor. We are here to address the human problem, Zelneth announced. His 4 eyes scanning the assembled delegates. Murmurs rippled through the chamber like waves across a disturbed Pond Counselor Vetha of the Kresh Collective shifted uncomfortably in her seat as holographic displays lit up around the circular room. The images showed human expansion across the galaxy over the past 2 centuries. What had started as a single species confined to one blue world had exploded into a sprawling network of colonies spanning 17 star systems. They reproduced too quickly, complained Ambassador Thrix of the Methodical Concordat, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into standard galactic speech. They adapt to easily, added Matriarch Celine of the Ondari Commonwealth. They question everything and follow no established protocols, said another voice from the back. Vitha watched the proceedings with growing unease. She had spent time among humans during a diplomatic mission to their trade hub on New Havana Station. They were loud and chaotic, yes, but also remarkably creative and surprisingly kind. The Kresh had been suffering from a blight affecting their food crops for decades until a human agricultural scientist named Dr. Marcus Webb had solved it in 18 months. I must voice my concern, Vitha said. Rising from her seat, the humans have been valuable trading partners and have contributed significantly to upsetting the natural order, Zelneth interrupted. In 200 years, they have claimed territory that took the rest of us millennia to settle. They trade with anyone regardless of council sanctions, added Thrix. They share technology freely without proper oversight. They encourage younger species to question the council's authority, said another delegate. The debate raged for hours as the anti-human faction grew louder and more insistent. Fatha and a handful of other delegates tried to argue for restraint, for dialogue, for finding a peaceful solution to integrate humanity into the existing galactic framework, but fear had taken root in the chamber. Fear is being surpassed, of losing control, of watching the carefully maintained balance of power crumble under the weight of human innovation and expansion. When the vote came, Vitha watched in horror as 41 species voted in favor of the eradication protocol. Only 6 voted against. The protocol was not some crude military assault that would violate galactic law and trigger condemnation. Instead, the Council's Biological Warfare Division had engineered something far more insidious over the past decade. A plague that would target human genetics exclusively, spreading through their populations like wildfire while leaving every other species completely untouched. Would appear natural, tragic, but unavoidable. A cosmic accident that claimed a species too fragile for the harsh realities of galactic existence. Vrin deployed the plague through subtle means. Traders unknowingly carried the pathogen from Nexus Prime back to their worlds within weeks. The first cases appeared on Earth within months. Every human colony reported infections. The plague attacked the human immune system in ways their medicine could not counter. Hospitals overflowed with the sick, and dying brilliant human scientists worked desperately to find a cure. But the engineered disease adapted faster than they could respond. Vetha monitored the reports from her chambers, each update feeling like a knife twisting in her conscience. She had voted against this atrocity, but her single voice had been powerless against the tide. Human transmissions grew sporadic and then ceased altogether. The last broadcast from Earth was a simple message played on repeat. This is emergency broadcast station Alpha. If anyone can hear this, we are dying. Please help, please. Then Silence Council enforcers moved in to claim human territories under the guise of quarantine and humanitarian assistance. They found empty cities, abandoned colonies, and the remnants of a species that had been systematically murdered. Human settlements were dismantled and their resources divided among council species. The Vrin took the industrial worlds, the Ondari claimed the agricultural colonies, and smaller species picked over what remained within a year. It was as if humanity had never existed at all. The council held a memorial service, a grand ceremony where they mourned the tragic natural plague that had claimed their friends and trading partners. Hypocritical speeches filled the chamber as the same voices that had voted for genocide now praised human contributions to galactic culture. Evitha did not attend. She could not stomach the performance. Instead, she sat in her private chambers, reviewing economic data that had begun to trouble. Her human trading companies had been managing 17% of all galactic commerce. Their absence had created gaps in supply chains that other species were struggling to fill. Medical shipments to rim worlds were delayed. Technology transfers had slowed. Several ongoing research collaborations had simply stopped when the human scientists died, but these seemed like minor inconveniences at first. The galaxy would adapt, or so the council believed. Vatha noticed something else in the reports. Though conflicts between species that had been rare were becoming more common, the humans had apparently been serving as neutral mediators in dozens of minor disputes without their intervention. Old grudges were reigniting. The Threxian Empire and the Ondari Commonwealth had maintained an uneasy peace for decades, largely because human trade stations served as neutral ground, where both sides could meet. Now tensions were rising along their shared borders. Most troubling to Vitha were the reports from the Galactic Rim. Humanity had maintained research outposts and defense stations in that remote region. Council had assumed these were simple exploration projects, but as the enforcers cataloged human facilities, they found something disturbing. Massive defensive installations pointed outward into the void beyond known space weapons platforms that had been actively maintained and supplied. Sensor networks that had been monitoring something in the SE darkness, and all of it had been shut down when humanity did. Vetha requested the full data from these installations, but received only fragments. The human systems were encrypted, and their AI assistants had self-terminated. Rather than allow access whatever the humans had been watching for, whatever they had been preparing to face, that vigil had ended 3 months after the last human died. Vetha stood before the council too. Present her concerns. We may have made a catastrophic error, she began, but Zelnath dismissed her worries with a wave of his hand. The galaxy survived 4 millions of years before humans appeared, he said. We will continue just fine without them. The other counselors nodded in agreement. They had won. The human threat was eliminated. Order was restored. Vitha returned to her chambers and began compiling a secret archive. She gathered every piece of human technology, every research paper, every cultural record she could acquire before the council destroyed them. She did not know why, but some instinct told her that the galaxy would need this knowledge, that humanity's absence would be felt far more deeply than anyone realized, and she was right. The unraveling had already begun. 5 years had passed since the last human took their final breath, and the galaxy was dying, not all at once, not with the dramatic spectacle that had accompanied humanity's extinction, but slowly, inexorably, like a machine grinding to a halt. One Gira at a time. Vetha stood in the council chamber reviewing casualty reports from the Threxian Onadari War. What had started as a minor border dispute over mining rights had exploded into full-scale conflicts. 17 worlds had been devastated. Billions had died or been displaced, and the council seemed powerless to stop it. We need to deploy peacekeepers immediately, Matriarch Celine demanded. Though her own Commonwealth forces were among the primary aggressors, your people fired on our supply convoy? Countered General Krauth of the Threxian Empire. You violated the neutral zone established under the New Havana Accords. Celine shot back. Vitha listened to the arguments spiral into accusations and counter-accusations. New Havana Accords had been negotiated at the human trade station of the same name. Human diplomats had spent 2 years bringing both sides together, finding compromises, building trust through shared economic interests. Without that neutral ground and those patient mediators, the old hatreds had returned with a vengeance, but the war was only one symptom of the greater sickness spreading through. Galactic civilization reports flooded in from across known space. Agricultural worlds that had relied on human-optimized farming techniques were experiencing crop failures. Humans had apparently redesigned irrigation systems, developed new fertilizer combinations, and bred hybrid crops, specifically tailored to alien biology and local conditions without their expertise. Yields were dropping by 30 to 40% on some worlds. Famine had already claimed millions of lives on the outer colonies. Industrial production was collapsing on former human manufacturing worlds. Council species that had claimed these facilities discovered that the automated systems were far more complex than they appeared. Human engineers had created intricate networks of machinery that operated with remarkable efficiency. But the documentation was either encrypted or written in technical language that translators struggled to render accurately. Machines broke down and no one knew how to repair them. Production lines that had churned out everything from medical equipment to starship components ground to a halt. We should have kept some of them alive, muttered Ambassador Thrix during a recess in the council session. Silence. Zelnath hissed, "What we did was necessary for galactic stability," but even Zelnath looked worried. Vryn Dominion's economy had shrunk by 23%. Their technology sector had been heavily dependent on innovations that they now realized had originated from human research labs. Medical science was suffering especially hard. The Yithrin Confederation reported a new plague spreading through their population. Their own doctors were baffled by the Disasavatha, had accessed old records and discovered that a team of human xenobiologists had been studying this exact pathogen. They had been close to developing a vaccine when the eradication protocol killed them. She brought this information to the council but found only locked human laboratory facilities and encrypted research data. Whatever cure the humans had been developing died with them. Thousands of Yithrin citizens were dying every day, and the numbers kept climbing. Transportation networks were failing across the galaxy. Human logistics companies had managed the complex web of trade routes that connected hundreds of worlds. They used sophisticated algorithms and AI systems to optimize shipping schedules, avoid hazards, and maximize efficiency. Without them, ships arrived late or not at all. Goods piled up at spaceports. Critical supplies failed to reach remote colonies. The economic cost was staggering, but the social cost was worse. Species that had grown accustomed to regular trade and cultural exchange found themselves increasingly isolated. But perhaps most alarming were the reports from the Galactic Rimvetha had been monitoring the region that humanity had watched so carefully. She had assigned crash vessels to investigate the abandoned human defense stations. What they found terrified Hertha. Sensors that humans had maintained were sophisticated beyond anything the council possessed. They had been tracking something in the void beyond the galaxy's edge, something that was moving, getting closer. Vithas scientists analyzed the data and concluded that humanity had discovered a machine vast and utterly hostile to biological life. The humans had called it the Scourge. In their encrypted files, they had been monitoring its approach for decades, building defenses, developing weapons, preparing strategies, and now those defenses sat silent and unmanned. The Scourge had apparently been dormant or moving slowly while humans watched. But 18 months ago, shortly after the last human died, the machines had changed course. They were accelerating toward the Galaxy Vitha. Presented her findings to the council in a session that descended into chaos. This is speculation, Zelnath insisted. These Scourge machines may not even exist. The data is clear. Vetha countered. The humans discovered a threat and were preparing to face it. Then we shall prepare as well, said General Kroth. We defeated the humans easily enough. We murdered them with a plague while they slept. Vetha snapped, her usual diplomatic composure cracking. The Scourge will not be so icily dispatched. The council authorized a military expedition to the Rymit, was composed of the finest warships from a dozen species. Encountered the Scourge 3 months later, only one ship returned. The captain's report was brief and haunting. The Scourge was not a fleet but a swarm, millions, self-replicating machines that consumed everything in their path. They had torn through the council fleet in minutes. Their technology was beyond anything the galactic species possessed, and they were coming. Panic spread through the council. They threw resources at the problem, assembling scientists and military strategists from every species, but without human innovation driving progress, solutions were elusive. Every species had become comfortable, relying on established technology and traditional methods. Humans had been the ones pushing boundaries, asking uncomfortable questions. Trying radical new approaches, Vetha spent her days searching through captured human facilities. Desperately looking for answers, she found research stations on dead moons, laboratories hidden in asteroid fields. Archive centers that humans had scattered throughout their territory most were locked behind encryption that she could not break. Some had self-destructed when humans died, destroying their contents rather than allowing them to fall into council hands, but in those facilities she could access. Vetha found wonders weapons designs that could potentially harm the Scourge Shield, technologies that might protect against their weapons communication systems that could coordinate defenses. Across vast distances, there were medical breakthroughs that could save the Ithron species agricultural. Techniques that could end the famines, diplomatic frameworks that could stop the Threxionon de Whirl. Of it locked away in databases and incomplete projects, all of it useless. Without the humans who understood how to implement them, the galaxy had not just killed humanity, had lobotomized itself, cut out the part of its collective brain that solved problems and innovated in now. Facing existential threats on multiple fronts, galactic civilization was learning exactly how much it had depended on the species it had so casually erased. Vetha stood before the council once more. "We need humanity," she said simply. "They are dead." Zelnith replied, "They are gone, and we must face these challenges ourselves, then we will fail." Vetha said, "The Scourge will destroy us. The famines will claim billions. The wars will never end. And our civilization will collapse into darkness." "What do you propose?" asked Matriarch Celine. "Quietly we search for survivors." Vetha said, "Surely some humans must have escaped the plague somehow." But deep space scans found nothing. Human colonies were graveyards. Earth was a tomb holding billions of dead. Not a single human heartbeat could be detected anywhere in known space. The council had been thorough in their genocide. Dethora Vetha returned to her chambers and reviewed the data from a particular human facility she had discovered on a frozen moon in an unnamed system. The facility had been hidden, shielded, designed to escape detection. Inside were genetic samples, embryo storage units, cloning equipment, suspended animation chambers. A database that was only partially encrypted. Vetha began to decipher what she could. This was humanity's contingency. Plan their insurance policy against extinction aid vault, containing the seeds of their species, waiting to be awakened. The frozen moon of Epsilon 7 had no name beyond its catalog designation, and no remarkable features except the bitter cold that kept its surface at -200 degrees. Was the last place anyone would look for anything important, which was exactly why humanity had built their vault. There Vetha led the expedition personally, bringing only her most trusted people and swearing them to absolute secrecy if the council learned what she had found before she understood its full implications. They might destroy it. The facility was buried 3 kilometers beneath the ice, accessible only through a shaft that had been sealed and disguised to look like a natural formation vase. Engineers spent 2 weeks carefully excavating without damaging anything. When they finally breached the entrance, they found themselves in a vast underground complex. The air was stale, but breathable. Emergency lighting flickered on as they moved through corridors lined with doors. Behind each door lay chambers filled with cylindrical pods. Thousands of them. Each pod contained a human embryo in perfect suspension. Genetic samples from across humanity's diverse population, rich and poor. From every continent of Earth and every colony world day, complete genetic library of the species the council had murdered by the ancestors, whispered Vetha's chief scientist, a young Kresh named Halvon. They knew this might happen at the facility's heart. They found the command center. Banks of computers hummed to life as the expedition entered, apparently programmed to activate when living beings approach. Holographic displays lit up the room. Human face appeared. Flickering slightly, it was a recording. Triggered by their presence, the human was an older woman with gray hair and tired eyes. "If you are seeing this, then humanity has been wiped out." The recording said, "My name is Dr. Elizabeth Chen, and I am the director of Project Continuity. We knew the council feared us." Dr. Chen continued, "We saw the way they looked at our expansion, heard the whispers in their diplomatic channels, felt the resentment growing. Some of my colleagues believed we could negotiate, find common ground, prove our value as partners. In galactic civilization, I hoped they were right. But I prepared for them to be wrong. The recording explained the vault's purpose. Humanity had been secretly building these facilities across the galaxy, at least a dozen of them. Hidden in remote locations, each contained everything needed to restart human civilization genetic samples. Cultural archives, technological databases, historical records. We do not ask for vengeance. Dr. Chen said we ask for a chance to exist if you have found this vault. And if you choose to use it, know that we trusted you with our future. Be worthy of that trust. The recording and Dedvatha stood in silence. Feeling the weight of what she had discovered, this vault held the power to resurrect humanity, to undo the Council's greatest crime, to restore what had been stolen, but it also raised impossible questions. Hoyne was already examining the embryo storage systems. These are stable. He reported we could begin the gestation process immediately. The facility has artificial wombs and automated child-rearing systems. It could bring back thousands of humans within a standard year. Vetha called an emergency meeting of the 6 council members who had voted against the eradication protocol. They gathered in secret at a remote station, taking precautions to avoid surveillance. When Vetha revealed what she had found, the reactions varied. "We must destroy it," said Ambassador Korath of the Gentle Collective. "If Zelnath learns of this, he will see it as a threat if we destroy it." "We are no better than those who voted for genocide," countered Diplomat Rish of the Wandering Clans. "The question is not whether to use it, but how." Vetha said she presented the data her team had extracted from the vault's computers. The partially decrypted files contained research that could solve many of the galaxy's current crisis defense plans against the Scourge that were decades ahead of anything the Council's military had conceived. Medical research that included a complete cure for the Yithrin plague, agricultural innovations that could end the famines, diplomatic protocols and conflict resolution strategies and energy technologies that could power civilizations for millennia. But there was a problem: the files were incomplete. Without context, they referenced other research, assumed knowledge of human scientific principles, required expertise that had died with humanity. We need humans to implement this. Halvan explained their science built on itself in ways that do not translate easily. They thought differently than we do, approached problems from angles we do not naturally consider. Then we resurrect them, said Rish. But under what conditions? Asked Korath. We cannot simply release thousands of humans into the galaxy and hope for the best. The debate stretched. For hours, some argued for resurrecting a small population that could be controlled and monitored. Others wanted full restoration of humanity with apologies and reparations. Vetha listened to all sides before speaking. I propose we resurrect one generation. She said we raise them on a quarantined world, educate them, and do not tell them what the Council did. We say their ancestors died from a natural plague. We ask for their help solving our crises. And once the immediate threats are resolved, we decide their permanent status. It was a compromise that satisfied no one, but that everyone could accept. The 6 dissenting council members voted unanimously to proceed. But they would keep it secret from the rest of the council until humanity was needed. The resurrection began on a garden world designated as Havenine. It had been a human agricultural colony once. Now it would serve as a nursery for humanity's rebirth. Vathas team transported the first batch of embryos and began the gestation process. Artificial wombs nurtured the developing humans, while automated systems prepared everything needed for their care. But Vetha insisted on more than just machines. She recruited volunteers from her own species and the other 5 dissenting races: teachers, doctors, engineers, and caretakers, people willing to spend years raising human children without revealing the truth of their extinction. First generation numbered 5,000 day, carefully selected genetic cross-section of humanity. They were born. Over the course of 6 months, Vetha was present for the first birth. She watched as the tiny human infant took its first breath and let out a wail that echoed through the medical facility. The baby had no idea what it represented: the hope of a dead species, the potential salvation of a dying galaxy, the living proof of the Council's greatest sin. As the children grew, Vetha visited Haven 9 regularly. She watched them learn to walk and talk. Saw them display the curiosity and creativity that had made humanity both beloved and feared. The human children asked endless questions. They wanted to know how everything worked. They took apart machines to understand them and built new things from the pieces. They created art and music that moved their alien teachers to tears. They formed bonds of friendship that crossed species lines, and they were brilliant by age 10. The brightest human children were solving mathematical problems that challenged adult alien scientists by age 15. They were contributing to research projects by age 20. They were making innovations that echoed their extinct ancestors, but they were also suspicious. Humans had always been good at reading between the lines, at sensing when they were not being told the full truth. A young woman named Sarah Chen, perhaps a distant genetic relative of Dr. Elizabeth Chen, who had created the vault, began asking difficult questions. Why were humans confined to one world when other species traveled freely? Why were there no records of human civilization before the plague? Why did the alien teachers sometimes look at their human students with expressions of guilt and sorrow? Vetha knew the truth could not be hidden forever, though. The question was whether humanity would learn it before they were ready, and what they would do when they discovered that the galaxy had murdered their species and then resurrected them. Out of desperate need, the answer came sooner than anyone expected. Sarah Chen had always known something was wrong. She could not point to any single thing that proved it, but the feeling lived in her bones like an old injury that ached. Before storms, the official story was simple enough. Humanity had been thriving across the galaxy until a natural plague swept through their populations. Then, disease had killed billions before burning itself out. The survivors, including Sarah's generation, had been gathered on Haven 9 to rebuild. The Galactic community had graciously provided resources and education to help humanity recover. It was a nice story. It was also a lie Sarah could tell because she paid attention to the small details that others missed, the way the creche teacher, Halvin's eyes filled with tears when discussing human history, the fact that no human structures remained on Haven 9 despite it being a former colony, the carefully edited database, entries that mentioned humanity's past but provided no real details, the restriction fields that kept humans confined to one continent, for their own safety most of all. Sarah noticed the guilt it radiated from their alien caretakers, like heat from a star people. Did not feel that kind of guilt over a natural disaster. They felt it over something they had done. Failed to prevent. Sarah was 23 years old and worked as a research assistant in the main scientific facility on Haven 9. Her job gave her access to computer systems and data archives. She began investigating during her off hours, carefully covering her tracks. Human digital security instincts, apparently bred true even in resurrected populations, found the first clue in a maintenance log that should have been deleted, a reference to pre-eradication human technology in a catalog of salvaged equipment eradication. Plague not outbreak eradication. The word opened doors in Sarah's mind. She started looking at everything differently. If humanity had been eradicated, who did it? Why? And why bring them back? She recruited 2 others to help with her investigation. Marcus Webb, a brilliant programmer who could slice through security systems like they were tissue paper, and Kenji Tanaka, a historian with an eidetic memory and a talent for spotting patterns. Together, they began systematically accessing restricted files. What they found horrified them. Partial records of council proceedings debating the human problem, references to something called the eradication protocol, medical files describing a genetically targeted plague, reports of human colonies going silent, documentation of the galaxy's collapse after humanity's extinction, and, finally, hidden in a damaged data core that had escaped proper security protocols, they found a fragment of Dr. Elizabeth Chen's original recording from the vault. Sarah watched her genetic ancestor explain Project Continuity, watched her describe how humanity had prepared for their own genocide, watched her talk about trust. Sarah felt something break inside her chest, then reform into something harder. She gathered the 5,000 humans of Haven 9 in the central plaza. They came because Sarah had a reputation for getting answers. She stood before her entire species and told them the truth. The council killed us all. She said every human being in the galaxy was murdered by a designed plague. Our entire species was wiped out because they feared our success. and they brought us back because they need us to save them from problems they cannot solve alone. The reaction was exactly what one might expect when 5,000 people learned their species had been victims of genocide rage grief demands. For revenge, Sarah, let them vent for hours before she spoke again. We can demand justice. She said we can refuse to help them. We can let the galaxy burn and feel righteous doing it, or we can be smarter than that. She laid out her plan. They would help the galaxy. They would solve the crises that threatened galactic civilization. But they would do it in a way that made humanity indispensable. They would embed themselves so deeply into galactic systems that removing them would be impossible. They would build leverage and gather power, and when they were strong enough, they would take what was owed their world, their history, their rightful place among the stars, and, most importantly, safeguards to ensure this could never happen again. The humans of Haven 9 agreed. If the Council wanted to use them, then humanity would allow it, but the price would be higher than the Council imagined. The first crisis they addressed was the Yithrin plague. Sarah led a team that accessed the encrypted medical research Dr. Chen had left in the vault. The cure existed in fragments across multiple files. Sarah and her colleagues spent 6 weeks piecing it together. When they presented it to Counselor Vitha, Sarah deliberately withheld key details. The cure requires ongoing treatment. Sarah explained a series of genetic therapies administered over several years. We will need to train Yithrin medical staff in the procedures. We will need to establish treatment centers, and we will need human medical supervisors to ensure proper implementation. It was not entirely true. The cure could have been a one-time treatment, but Sarah's version required sustained human involvement. Vitha looked at Sarah with understanding in her eyes. She knew what the young human was doing. Creating, dependency building, institutional power. Vitha approved the plan without question, perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps out of guilt. Perhaps because she recognized that humanity deserved this. Yithron cure was a spectacular success within months. The plague was contained within a year. It was eradicated. Grateful Yithron leaders praised the humans who had saved millions of lives. They also signed agreements giving humans permanent positions in Yithron medical infrastructure. Came the agricultural crisis. Marcus led this effort. Diving into the vault's farming archives, he found that human agricultural techniques were far more sophisticated than the Council species realized. Humans had not just optimized alien farming methods, they had completely reimagined them using principles the other species had never considered. Crop rotation patterns based on complex ecological models, fertilizer combinations that leveraged unique chemical interactions, irrigation systems that used predictive algorithms to minimize water waste. Marcus rolled out these solutions slowly. Each improvement required human consultation. Farm that adopted the new methods needed human technical support. Each success story led to more requests for human agricultural experts. Food production increased. Across the galaxy, famine's end, and humanity became essential to feeding billions. Kenji tackled the diplomatic crisis. The Threxian Dari War had claimed countless lives and showed no signs of ending. Kenji studied the new Havana Accords and the human diplomatic approaches that had worked before. He proposed a radical solution rather than trying to impose peace from above. They would rebuild the economic interdependence that had made war costly. Human trade coordinators would establish new, neutral markets. Human mediators would facilitate dialogue without taking sides. Human economic planners would create joint projects that benefited both empires. It worked slowly at first, then momentum built. Soldiers put down weapons to work on collaborative infrastructure projects. Politicians found compromise easier when humans framed it as mutual gain. The war did not end with a treaty. It simply became pointless when both sides had more to gain from cooperation, and through it all, humans were careful to make themselves indispensable. They did not just solve problems, created systems that required ongoing human management training programs that needed human instructors, technology that required human maintenance, institutions that relied on human expertise. Within 3 years, humanity had gone from 5,000 confined individuals to a species with fingers in every major galactic institution. The Council could not move against them without crippling themselves, but the scourge still approached that would be the final. Sarah had been studying the defense plans from the UNS Strategic thinking about the Scourge was decades ahead of anything the Council had conceived, but Sarah understood something important. The fight against the Scourge would determine humanity's ultimate position in the galaxy if they saved the galaxy from extinction. No one could ever justify treating humans as second-class citizens. Against Sierra requested a full council session. It was time to bring everything into the light, time to make the council face what they had done, and time to set the terms for humanity's permanent future. The council chamber had never been so full. Every species in the galactic community had sent representatives. They came because Sarah Chen had promised revelations that would reshape galactic civilization. They came because humanity had spent 3 years becoming indispensable. They came because everyone wanted to know what the resurrected humans would say. Sarah stood at the center of the circular chamber, wearing simple clothing, no ceremonial robes, no diplomatic finery, just practical work clothes that marked her as a scientist rather than a politician. Behind her stood the leaders of humanity's various initiatives: Marcus, with his agricultural programs; Kenji, with his diplomatic corps; Dr. Amira; Okafor, who led the medical team's commander; James Park, who had been training the anti-Scourge defense forces. 5,000 humans had grown to 50,000 as the vault's remaining embryos were awakened. Of them knew the truth now. Of them stood ready to support what Sarah was about to do. Counselor Vetha sat in her designated seat, looking older than her years. Guilt of the past decade had carved lines into her face. High Arbiter Zelnith presided from his elevated platform. He looked annoyed at being summoned by a human. This assembly recognizes Sarah Chen of humanity. Zelnith announced, you requested this session, claiming matters of galactic importance. State your purpose. Sarah activated the holographic projectors she had installed throughout the chamber. Images filled the Air Council proceedings from 10 years. Medical reports on the eradication protocol maps, showing the systematic extermination of human colonies. Casualty estimates: 19 billion. Human beings murdered over the course of 18 months. I am here to present evidence of genocide. Sarah said quietly, her voice carried through the chamber's acoustics. Every delegate heard her clearly. 10 years ago, this council voted to exterminate humanity, not through war, which would have been honest, but through a designed plague that targeted our genetics specifically. Chaos erupted. Delegates shouted denials or demanded explanations. Security forces moved uncertainly. Unsure what to do, Zelnith struck his staff for order, but the noise continued. Sarah let the chaos run its course. She had planned for this reaction. When the chamber finally quieted, she continued, we have full documentation. Sarah said, vote tallies showing 41 species approved the eradication. Protocol communications between council members discussing the human problem. Medical records describing the plague's design. We also have evidence of what happened after you killed us. More images appeared: the galaxy and collapse wars, famines, plagues, economic disaster, the Scourge advancing while the council fumbled helplessly. You murdered us because you feared our success, Sarah said. Then you desperately needed us because you could not survive without our innovations. So you resurrected us from genetic samples, lied about our history, and used us to solve your problems. She paused and looked directly at Zelnith. How am I doing so far? This is outrageous, Zelnith sputtered. You were told the truth about the plague. We were told lies. Sarah interrupted. Convenient. Lies designed to make us grateful to the council that murdered our species. Vetha stood slowly. Every eye in the chamber turned to her. She speaks the truth. Vetha said. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. I voted against the eradication protocol. I argued for peace, for finding another way, but I was outvoted, and when the consequences of our genocide threatened to destroy us all, I led the effort to resurrect humanity. I hoped we could hide what we had done. I hoped we could make amends through action rather than confession. I was wrong. The chamber erupted again this time. The shouting included calls for Vetha's arrest demands, for the truth accusations and counter-accusations flying between Delegate Sarah. Let it continue for exactly 90 seconds. Then she activated the emergency broadcast system. Her face appeared on screens across the galaxy. Billions of beings on hundreds of worlds watched in real time. Citizens of the galactic community, Sarah said, "You are witnessing the council confront the truth of what they did to humanity. They murdered us all. Every man, woman and child, 19 billion people, and they would have kept this secret forever if we had not uncovered it." The broadcast was Sarah's insurance policy. The council could not silence her now. Could not arrest the humans or retaliate, not with the entire galaxy watching. So what do you want? Zelnith demanded. His composure had cracked. He looked like a leader realizing he had lost control. "What is your price for silence?" "Silence?" Sarah laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "We do not want silence. We want justice. We want Earth returned to human control. We want every former human colony world restored to us. We want a permanent seat on the council with veto power over all major decisions. We want reparations for the genocide. We want guarantees enshrined in galactic law that this can never happen to any species again, and we want it all documented, publicized, and taught in every school across the galaxy." "Unacceptable," said General Krauth of the Threxian Empire. "You are 5,000, 50,000. Sarah corrected, and growing daily as we awaken more from the vaults, but our numbers are irrelevant. She gestured to her colleagues. "We control the Yithrin medical infrastructure that keeps millions alive. We manage the agricultural systems that feed billions, coordinate the diplomatic networks that maintain peace. We command the only military forces that understand how to fight the scourge. You need us more than we need you if you refuse our terms. We withdraw, we take our knowledge and our skills, and we leave you to face the scourge alone. You are threatening the galaxy." Matriarch Celine said, but her voice lacked conviction. "You threatened us first." Sarah replied, "You murdered us first. We are simply making sure you can never do it again." Commander Park stepped forward. He activated a tactical display showing the Scourge's approach. "They will reach the outer colonies in 6 months. Park said they will hit core worlds in 2 years, and we have defense plans that might stop them. Plans developed by our murdered ancestors specifically for this threat, but implementing those plans requires trust. It requires unity. It requires humans to be treated as equal partners, not disposable tools." The chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed this. The Scourge was not a hypothetical threat, was an approaching apocalypse, and only humanity had any idea how to survive it. Vatha stood again. "I propose we accept humanity's terms." She said, "We cannot undo the genocide, cannot bring back the 19 billion we murdered. But we can ensure humanity never fears for their existence again. We can build a better galaxy from the ashes of our greatest crime." The debate raged. For hours, some delegates supported Vetha immediately, others resisted until economic or security concerns changed their minds. The Yithron representative pointed out that refusing meant death for millions of his people. The agricultural worlds noted that rejecting the terms meant starvation. Military strategists confirmed that without human defense plans, the Scourge would annihilate them one by one. Species fell in line not out of moral conviction, though some genuinely felt remorse, but out of necessity. The galaxy needed humanity to survive. When the vote came, it was unanimous. Earth and all former human colonies would be returned to human sovereignty. Humanity would hold a permanent council seat with full veto power. Reparations would be paid from council funds. The genocide would be formally acknowledged and memorialized. New galactic laws would prohibit the targeting of any species for eradication. Sarah felt no triumph as the vote was announced. This was not victory, this was survival. Humanity had clawed its way back from extinction and secured a place at the table, but the cost had been 19 billion lives. Nothing could balance that equation after the session. Vetha approached Sarah privately. "I am sorry," the old Kresh said, "for what I did and what I failed to prevent." Sarah looked at Hershey, could see the genuine remorse in Vetha's eyes. "You tried to stop it." Sarah said, "You saved us when you could have let us stay extinct. That does not erase the crime." "But it matters. What will humanity do now?" Vetha asked Sarah. Considered the question. Humanity had secured their survival and their rights, but the Scourge was coming. Wars still threatened the galaxy. Countless species needed help that only humans could provide. "We will do what we have always done," Sarah said. "We will solve problems. We will build things. We will push boundaries and ask uncomfortable questions. We will be the galaxy's conscience and its innovation engine, but this time we will do it on our terms, and anyone who threatens Humanity again will learn exactly how dangerous a species becomes when you murder them once and give them a second chance. Sarah returned to Haven that night. She stood in the memorial garden that humans had built. 19 billion lights glowed. In the darkness, one for each murdered soul. She did not know their names, did not know their stories, but they were family. They were humanity, and Sarah had ensured they would never be forgotten. The galaxy would remember what it had done, would live with. That Giltan would work every day to earn humanity's continued cooperation. It was not forgiveness, but it was a future and for a species that had been erased and resurrected. Sometimes a future was enough. Tomorrow, the real work would begin preparing defenses against the scourge, rebuilding Earth and the colony world, straining the next generation of humans to take their place among the stars. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to grieve for the billions who had died for the galaxy that had failed them.